This is Deep Rock Galactic, a 1 to 4 player co-op shooter focused around being space dwarves while running a asteroid mining operation and trying not to get eaten by all the alien bugs that really don't want you mining the asteroids. And although the game definitely has a co-op focus, you'll notice that the footage in the background is actually solo play because I wanted to test how solo friendly the game actually is, just out of curiosity, because it does mention that there are features enabled for solo players. You get a upgradable drone called Bosco that follows you around and can be ordered to do various things as well as helping you defend areas, and I wanted to know just how well balanced and how different the missions get for a solo player. Is it actually viable solo? And I gotta say, it actually works really well. Although the game is very obviously meant to be played in co-op for the best experience, the solo play actually does work really well. The upgradable drone is very helpful and has a lot of really fun upgrades for you, including a big missile launch that you can order in various places to like fear enemies and do huge damage in areas. It can help you mine, and it can light up areas for you. It's just a really fun experience actually in solo or in co-op, so there's actually quite a lot to do for just about anyone, and it's really fair to just jump in and try it for yourself because there's a lot on offer here, so let's get into it. So you are a space dwarf working for the titular corporation, Deep Rock Galactic, mining these giant asteroids. And there are several different biomes of these asteroids, these areas that you can unlock as you go through the game. Each one is very different, from these sort of big crystalline caverns with lots of crystals blocking the way and sharp turns to much more open, sort of fungal-looking areas. There's actually quite a lot in terms of different locations to visit, so even though you might think mining an asteroid is going to all look pretty gray and rocky, that's actually not the case. There's a lot of different biomes with their own different threats and things that you have to overcome to actually look forward to, and of course each one also has its own set of resources that you can mine, usually two different main resources to mine that are either scarce or common depending on the specific biome that you're talking about. And these come in handy because there is a persistent upgrade system for each character. The game is actually class-based. There are 4 classes, which makes sense. It is 4-player co-op max, and every class has a very different set of gear that makes each one very unique. None of them play the same at all. You will start the tutorial as the gunner, which has a minigun to start off with and a powerful magnum revolver. But you can also eventually change to other classes like the Scout, which is really good for lighting up distant areas and things because, of course, you are in an asteroid, so it is quite dark. Everyone has a rechargeable set of flares, but the Scout has more options to light the way a lot better, so they're very useful to have for visibility in the team, especially in the larger open areas, missions that have the big sort of harvest areas and things, because they're often quite dark but very large, so being able to see all the various veins that need to be mined and things at a distance is really useful. There's also the Driller that is the most efficient and effective miner of the whole group, with a lot of different gadgets that help them do that better than anyone else, and the Engineer, the class I'm playing in the background right now, which is your sort of support class with more close-range weapons and the ability to place a turret that can be put pretty much anywhere that there is stable ground to help defend areas. I figured that would be a good choice for trying out these solo modes because, you know, having a turret is really useful in solo play, generally speaking, so it turned out to be a very good idea. But all of the classes are actually a lot of fun to play, and the fact that each of them has quite a large selection of different gadgets makes them all play very differently. So everyone will have a primary and secondary weapon to start with, but as you progress through the game, you'll also be able to unlock additional weapons for each slot that will just change them in different ways. They're often quite different to their starting weapons, so they're not necessarily meant to be upgrades, but rather just things that perform differently and maybe synergize with each other in different ways. So depending on the type of mission that you're going to or the different area that you're going to, you might want to select a different loadout. You will also have a grenade, and the grenades are not all just a frag grenade. There are all sorts of different kinds. The Engineer, for instance, gets a decoy grenade to start with that just taunts enemies in a large area, very useful for placing near your turret and things to sort of group them all up. And of course for your grenade launcher, secondary to group them all up for a big explosion. But it can also be switched later for things like the plasma grenade, which bursts like 4 novas of plasma damage in a sort of small area that can be useful for the larger enemies hitting weak spots behind them and things, and also eventually gets proximity mines that you can lay that synergize really well with some of the other classes in ways to sort of make certain areas choke points and have enemies just get blown up as they're coming through to help narrow these sort of big waves of enemies that are coming at you in the harder sort of defense missions. But in addition to that, the different types of gear are not the only bits of customization, because there is also a large selection of upgrades for each piece of gear as well. Every weapon, every of the main gadgets, every one of the main gadgets like the turrets and things like that, they all have upgrade trees. And a lot of the resources that you're collecting, the money and the various different minerals from different biomes, will all be used for upgrading all of your gear to make you stronger and able to take on higher threat missions more effectively. There are different slots on each weapon and piece of gear that unlock as you level up that particular class by playing it more often, and each slot usually has at least 2, sometimes 3 or 4 different upgrades that can be purchased for it for different amounts of different currencies. So you're able to buy as many of them as you want and have the resources for, and then equip one in each slot. You can hot swap them for free once you have them unlocked, so that you can sort of customize your loadout for any given mission, depending on what it is that you want to do. You know, maybe you want, if you're going on a long mining expedition, maybe you want the upgrades that add a whole bunch of extra ammo so that you can last longer without having to call in a bunch of supply drops and things. But if you're going for more of the sort of boss encounter missions, maybe you want to switch that out for something that ups your damage, gives you a bunch of armor penetration and stuff like that, so that you can kill things more effectively because you're going to be facing large enemies instead of a long sort of protracted mission. So yeah, there's actually a lot of customization here, and I like the fact that even the emplacements like the turrets and things all have their own upgrade trees that really do make it feel like every class is vastly different. That's the mark of a very good class-based shooter, in my opinion, having them all be quite varied, but also not really homogenized in any way, and also being able to synergize very well with each other. And that brings me to the traversal tools. Every class has a traversal tool. The engineer, for instance, has a platform creator that actually creates these circular foam platforms that you can stand on, and one of the upgrades for it even makes it to where enemies will avoid standing on them, so that you can use them to zone specific areas and help almost like tower defense them towards your emplacements like mines and turrets and things, if you want to use it that way. And it's just useful for getting to higher areas and making sure that you have different ways out of pits and stuff, because these platforms last forever once you place them. They are permanent parts of the terrain unless you break them with your pickaxe, which you can also do to help shape them and stuff, so that's really cool. And there are also other uses for these, because in co-op everyone is going to be using their own tools. So for instance, the gunner has a zipline creation tool that allows them to fire up zip lines that can be used up or down. You don't have to rely purely on gravity, and you can even shoot while on them and things because you're sort of attached by your back to them, so you can use your arms at the same time. So that's one really obvious way that the classes work together, using their various traversal tools, since each class has its own specific one. Using them together to efficiently get around the large mine areas is important. And as I mentioned, if you're playing solo, you also get Bosco, the adorable little drone thing that follows you around that has its own set of upgrades that you unlock by leveling up your overall account level, which is just done by leveling up individual characters and just playing the game, basically. And these are really useful too. Things like adding extra revive charges, but it can actually revive you a couple of times, so having more charges can be really useful on the longer missions or the more difficult, higher threat level missions. Things like a missile launcher, improving the missile launcher with things like a cryo burst or making it fear enemies. Adding an electrical component to its overall main weapon so that it can actually electrify enemies, which is actually really good for the engineer, because one of his alternate primary weapon is this SMG right here that fires electrical rounds, and one of its upgrades is to do extra damage to enemies that are electrified, so that synergizes with the drone really well, making you do very high sort of single target damage, really good for the more boss sort of focused missions to equip those to synergize with each other. So yeah, there's definitely a lot in terms of the overall gear and character customization, and that's not even getting into the appearance customization. There's a lot of cosmetic choices that you can make, from different beards and sideburns, because you're a dwarf, so of course you can customize that, to just everything like skin tone, hats, armor, all the sort of cosmetic appearance related stuff. You can customize all of that. And there are all sorts of things that you can buy in a shop for in-game currency. There's also these sort of treasure pods that you can find eventually in certain areas. There's a lot of different sort of mini events you can find in the missions, and these sort of treasure pods, you have to find these batteries and then bring them to the pod, put them in, repair the pod, and then it will open up, give you a whole bunch of different resources, and then some sort of cosmetic, like a taunt or a new color scheme, all sorts of things. So yeah, you can earn cosmetics just by playing the game. Imagine that. And there's a lot of them, and you can even go so far as to customize every individual aspect of your pickaxe, like what each end looks like, what the pommel looks like, what the actual stick part looks like. It's all customizable. So yeah, this is definitely a game that is heavily focusing on learning your favorite characters, coming to terms with your various different favorite pieces of gear for them and upgrading them, and then choosing to look however you want to look. It's, you know, one of those games that you settle into a character or two that you really like, and then just slowly gather more cosmetic options and upgrades and things for all of them until you feel like you got the exact character that you want. As for the mission types, I feel that the game really shines here. There's a whole bunch of different mission types. It's not all just about mining. You will start with the simple mining missions where you have this adorable mule thing called Molly that follows you around, that you can just mine stuff from the wall and put it in there, and eventually once you find enough of whatever the mission has you finding, you can go home. which going home is its own ordeal because you have a limited amount of time to get back to the escape pod and actually escape, usually about 5 minutes in the earlier missions, but it can be decreased to like 3 minutes in different other kinds of missions. But these mining missions are only the start, because eventually as you progress through the sort of campaign, there is, despite it being a co-op focused game, there is a sort of campaign where you go to the different biomes and do different specific types of missions in a certain order to unlock more new types of missions. And this is also how you unlock new pieces of gear for different characters. Once you finish parts of the campaign, you can then unlock more features of your main home base hub, like the mineral exchange for getting different resources that you may be lacking right now for upgrades, and the new pieces of gear. But the different kinds of missions are really varied. Things like point extraction missions, where you will be in a larger cave system, a more open one, and you have to find these various liquid wells and then call down these pumps on the wells and then build out a network of pipes from a sort of central mining base out to the wells. Build all the pipes, and then a wave-based defense mission will start where you have to maintain the pipes, make sure they don't get all clogged up and stuff, and mine all of the liquid from these wells and then escape. You also have stuff like the one you're seeing in the background right now, where you have to call down and defend this huge machine called a drill dozer that will take damage on its specific parts as it goes through the mines, and you have to continuously defend and repair it, and eventually it will run out of fuel, and you have to take off the fuel canisters and then suction up a bunch of oil from the various different areas, and then eventually you'll reach one of these huge sort of defense things at the end of the mission, where there will be kind of a wave-based defense with all sorts of extra different types of enemies and stuff that you normally don't see in the other missions, as it intensifies and gets harder and harder as that gauge at the top depletes and you get closer to actually completing the mission. And there are other things as well, like salvaging a failed mission from a previous team, repairing their mules in their base and escaping with it, mining specific minerals or monster eggs, these creature eggs, and actually having to carry them back to mining bases by hand, or even the more boss-focused missions that have you basically clearing out an infestation and fighting multiple sort of boss fights in an area, which often are really good in co-op because they rely a lot on preparing the area for a big fight, flattening it or making a certain network of tunnels to help you fight, to help create choke points and stuff like that for the big boss, and then eventually executing the fight and hoping to live. There are a really large number of different mission types, and recent updates have just added more of them, and they are all pretty well balanced, either in solo or in co-op, so they're all enjoyable. You won't find a mission type that is like closed to you if you're playing a certain mode or something. They're all balanced enough and scale well enough to be doable pretty much no matter what. So I think it's commendable to have such a variety of content in a co-op focused game like this, but also have a lot of it be perfectly reasonable for a solo player if you want to do it that way. It's a game that has a lot of personality, a whole bunch of character. It really revels in its like space dwarf theme and has all of the various tropes that you would expect, all the sort of Henri swearing dwarfs and getting alcohol at your base and then going down and complaining about your mission and then doing it anyway. It's just a lot of fun, and I think it's kind of hard to find much fault with it, because what it sets out to do, make this really interesting co-op mining experience with like a shooter in the middle of it, it pulls off really well. There's really not much that I can say that I don't like. I can't really even think of anything. One thing I guess I will say is that because of the procedural nature of the caves that you'll go in, occasionally you may be faced with something that is a little bit more annoying than it could be, like an escape pod being sort of wedged in a really small area that you have to sort of mine out a little bit to be able to get to the actual entrance of the escape pod or something. But really, that kind of stuff is a very small annoyance that very rarely happens, and when it does happen, because of the completely destructible nature of the areas you're in, it's really just a case of making your own solution. And I can't really fault the game for being really good at making your own solution, because that's sort of what mining games like this are all about anyway. So even that isn't really so much of a complaint as it is just an observation that it goes whole hog with the whole mine your way through the tunnels thing and sort of solve problems your own way, and that's not a bad thing at all. So that is Deep Rock Galactic. It is a very, very good, just fantastic co-op shooter with a really nice theme, and it's fun to be a space dwarf, mining asteroids and swearing a lot, and it just does exactly what it wants to do very well. So I have nothing bad to say about it, really. If you want to check it out, the link to the Steam page will be in the description below this video. Wishlist it if you want, get your friends to play it. Steam doesn't do the whole like 4-pack thing anymore. You can't really buy like multi-packs of games that are co-op. That they don't let people offer those, so it's a little bit more difficult. You can't just like buy a pack and gift it or anything like that, but this is definitely the kind of thing that is worth getting your friends to play with you, because the classes all work really well together, and it's just a whole lot of very nicely characterized fun to go through these co-op mining missions and hopefully don't get eaten by giant bugs. That's Deep Rock Galactic. Thank you guys very much for watching. Any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below, and I'll see you next time.